Donald Barthel is our presenter today. He is a founding partner at Bradford Barthel and the founder of Bradford Barthel's AMA Analysis and Rating Department. Mr. Barthel's entire legal career has been dedicated to the defense of employers' rights in the arenas of labor law, employment law, and workers' compensation. For a quarter of a century, his practice has exclusively focused on workers' compensation defense and related matters. We do hope you enjoy the presentation that Don has prepared for today. And with that, Mr. Barthel is going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi everybody, Don Barthel here. Greetings from the wet and windy Sacramento. We have flood warnings through the rest of the week, and last night we had winds of 40 miles per hour. If you're here in the Sacramento area, I feel your pain. If you're nowhere near here and having good weather, I am jealous. We're going to talk about the AMA guides, rating issues, tricks of the trade, and how to hopefully save ourselves some money, or at least not pay too much. Just a little primer, though. I want to provide this information. The rating department that Tim has made reference to has, at this point, done well over 10,000 analyses. And whether you utilize our assistance on that score or not, and obviously I'd love to encourage you to do so, there is some information that we've gleaned as a result of doing these thousands and thousands of reports of just about every single doctor in the state of California. We've, number one, been able to get a list of the doctors throughout the state and listed as the pros and the cons, the ups, the downs, the good and the bads about these various doctors. So if you're having an AME proposed to you, or you see a panel and you don't know the background of the doctors, please feel free to give me a call, text me, what have you, and I can give you that information. I can tell you what our rating department has and or what our local attorneys have on that doctor. We've got attorneys handling appearances anywhere from San Diego to Eureka, so invariably we'll have somebody who can assist you. On top of, I'll get back to that in a second. I've had a little bit background in terms of training in the AMA guides. I just want to point out that I've actually had the opportunity to train statewide and nationwide. I'm also the only non-physician on the American Board of Independent Medical Examiners, and I was a reviewer of the AMA Guides 6th edition. Now, you know we don't use the 6th edition in California. Labor Code Section 4660 demands that we use the 5th edition, but nonetheless. Take a look at this chart. Although this was for the period of a few years ago, it represents exactly, even now, what kind of accuracy we're getting from doctors. That red light, or rather each of the blue dots represents reports. The red line represents reports that actually came out with the correct whole person impairment. So if there's a blue dot on the red line, it signifies that we had received a report where the doctor actually got it right. Above, the reports that are above suggest that those are reports where the doctor actually understated the amount of permanent disability, or more specifically, the amount of impairment. That happens about 2% of the time. Over 80% of the time, the dots underneath the red line, we have doctors overstating the level of impairment. Those of you who have been doing this for way too long, I'm sure it comes as no surprise, but I just wanted to let you know that the numbers actually confirm your suspicions on that score. All right, we're going to talk about a whole mess of things. Let's hit combinations first off. You know you have your combinations values chart on page 604 of the AMA guides. And the whole point of the combinations value table is to avoid getting something over 100%. I know that 100% PD or 100% whole person impairment is a whole lot of money. We don't want to have to pay 110%. And the combination value table does some serious work with the higher numbers you get. For example, if you have a 99% impairment or PD, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% for the additional injury will not get you to 100%. You actually need a 50 to combine with a 99% to get it to 100%. So the combinations value table does a lot of heavy lifting. For those of you who have been doing this since prior to 1997, you'll remember the multiple disability table, which was the predecessor to the combines value table. Rest in peace, religion and rating, what does that mean? Well, back in the old days, unlike the combinations value table, which provides all of the numbers that we need, the multiple disability table did not. And we would look up the, when you would look up the schedule, we'd see, well, do the numbers that we need, are they in there, or am I going to have to do some math? And I remember thinking, please, God, let the numbers be in there so I don't have to do the math. Well, with the combinations value table, I no longer have to pray for that, that the numbers are going to be there. The general rule for combination value table is all impairments are converted to whole person impairment, adjusted for FEC, occupation, and age. Of course, FEC through 2013, now the multiplier for dates of injury on or after 1/1/13 is the 1.4 modifier. But for dates of injury between 1/1/05 and 12/31/12, we still use the 1 through 8 FEC modifiers. And as I said, the general rule is we rate out the various body parts and we combine at the PD level. Numbers that are put together for an evaluation of impairment or PD must either be combined or added. What do we want it to do? What do we want? We, as the defense, want to combine. We never want to add if we can avoid it. If you add in a situation where you have combined, where you should have combined, you will overpay. There is no exception to this rule. You never, ever want to add where you should be combining. Combining saves you money. When do we combine? In virtually every situation. The only situations in which we don't combine, in which we add, these situations are expressly stated in the AMA guide. The most notable exception to combining is when you've got range of motion for the same body part. So, for example, you have flexion impairment and extension impairment for the knee. Those two values will be added. Or you have a flexion, extension, left and right rotation of the lumbar spine. Those 4 values will be added and not combined. This is also true in Chapter 17, which is the lower extremities. We have a range of motion for the same body parts, such as the knee or ankle. Those body parts, those are added. Combining, we combine the vast majority of the various methodologies found on Table 17 or in the first table of Chapter 17, the atrophy, the strength, the arthritis, etc. We combine largest to smallest. So if you have a 30%, a 15%, and a 1%, you're going to combine the 30 with the 15, and then that sum with the 1. Why do I bring that up? Because there are 3 sets of instructions in the AMA guides and your permanent disability rating schedule. At one point in the AMA guides, it says you combine least to greatest. In another part of the AMA guides, it says you can combine in any order you want. And elsewhere in the guides, it says greatest to least. And that is echoed. The greatest to least is echoed in your permanent disability rating schedule, combines value table. So that is the way to go. And yes, it will make a difference, the order that you do this. The largest number is on the vertical scale, and the smallest number is on the horizontal scale. And here's an example of the combines value chart in case you haven't used it before. Take a look at the directions on the top right. To combine 2 values, locate the larger value on the left side of the chart, the smaller value on the bottom of the chart, and the intersection of that row and column contains the combined value table. All right, so the combined values chart. Definitely use the chart in the permanent disability rating schedule. Do not use the one in the AMA guides. Why? Well, not only does it have the wrong instructions, it has 5 errors. And you can make a note of this later, but in your AMA guide combinations value table at the end of the book, it says 54 combined with 12 is 59. It's not. It's 60. It says 58 combined with 25 is 68. It's not. It's 69. It says 94 combined with 78 is 98. That's wrong. It's 99. it says 95 combined with 30 is 96. That is incorrect. And it says 90 combined with 34 is 96. That's not right. It's 97. It's kind of irritating when you buy a book for $160, $170, $180, and it's just chock full of mistakes like this. But actually, that's something I should note in a footnote here. If you're dealing with the AMA Guides volume itself, that big green treatise, please make sure that you have a copy of the errata sheet. That is a document that issued a while after the AMA Guides 5th edition first issued. Once the 5th edition issued, the editors recognized that there were many mistakes in the book. So they issued this multi-page correction sheet, which if it's and it should come along with your AMA Guides volume. If it hasn't, go on the American Medical Association's website and you can download a copy. This is very important. When I was learning the AMA Guides 10, 12 years ago, I would often find myself not understanding a part of the AMA Guides, and I would read the section over and over and over, and it just wouldn't make sense to me. And only later on did I realize it didn't make sense because it was wrong, and the errata sheet would correct that. So don't go through the aggravation and the early gray hair that I've gone through. Look at the errata sheet to see if that information is there. Okay, upper and lower extremity impairments according to the Permanent Disability Rating Schedule. Extremities, upper legs and arms, are adjusted for FEC occupation and age, or 1.4 instead of the FEC for 1/1/13 dates of injury onward, and combined with other impairments of the same extremity before you go to other body parts. So before you combine with other body parts. So for example, you've got a left knee and a left ankle, so 2 injuries on the same extremity. You've got a spine injury and you've got a right knee injury. We're going to combine first the left knee and left ankle injury. Doesn't matter which numbers are the greatest or the least, spine, right knee, left ankle, left knee, doesn't matter whatsoever. We ignore the greatest to least rule and start off with combining the multiple impairments or permanent disability in the various parts of the same extremity. So we combine the left knee and the left ankle, and then we combine that sum with the next highest number. So say the spine is a higher number than the right knee, so we'll combine the sum with the spine and then combine that sum with the right knee. Let's talk a little bit about the pain add-on. It is a maximum 3%. Now this is important because we've actually had case law that suggests that you can provide much more than 3% for pain. We need to be wary of that. According to the AMA Guides, it is a maximum of 3% of pain. Now the 3% can be subdivided between different body parts, but it's still only 3, and we can't use fractions. So let's say in a weird auto accident, the injured worker's left and right arm are run over and their left and right leg are run over. If the doctor wants to provide additional impairment for pain, he or she can provide 1% to the one arm, 1% to the other arm, 1% to one leg, but no impairment to the fourth extremity. Or they could do it differently. Give all 3% to one of the extremities, or divide it 2-1, 1-2, whichever they see fit. Now, we're going to get a little bit more back to pain, but I want to underscore something that we've been using the AMA Guide since 2005 now. Actually, April 19th of 2004 was when SB 899 hit and all the changes were made. And doctors, I still see the doctors getting it wrong because they don't seem to understand the difference between work and impairment. The AMA Guides to the Evaluation of Permanent Impairment is the name of the book. It's not the AMA Guides to the Evaluation of Permanent Disability or Work Disability. Here's the difference. Impairment is the loss of use, or derangement of any body part, organ system, or organ function. It's measured against activities of daily living, something that we're going to be reviewing very quickly in a second. Disability, on the other hand, is measured against earning capacity loss. What you can't do in the open labor market, and how much disability you suffered in terms of competing in the open labor market. Disability, that is. Now, what's impairment? Again, it's measured by the AMA guide. Disability is measured by the way of the California Permanent Disability Rating Schedule. So AMA guides, impairment, not PD, but we convert it from impairment to PD using your schedule, adjusting for the FEC or 1.4, age, and occupation. Whole person impairment, in fact, doesn't measure disability or permanent disability. Why do I bring that up? Well, oftentimes we have doctors saying, okay, I've used the AMA guides and the impairment is X. But wait a minute, this injured worker is kept from their old job, so they have more impairment. Well, no, they don't. It's not impairment. It's not disability. It's impairment. Let me further provide this. Explain this. 90% WPI may be 100% PD, but take a look at some quotes from the AMA guides. The guides is not intended to be used for direct estimates of work disability. Impairment percentages derived according to the guides criteria do not measure work disability. It's inappropriate to use the guides criteria ratings to make direct estimates of work disability. So when a doctor says the impairment number is not large enough and tries to Alvarez Guzman you by saying, well, we need to take into consideration the diminished ability to work in the open labor market, the doctor's confusing impairment with disability. So this is how it's supposed to work. We're supposed to get the impairment number, convert to a whole person impairment number, FEC, occupation, age, and then get the disability. Unless the doctor is actually doing that, converting to whole person impairment, adjusting for FEC or 1.4, adjusting for occupation, adjusting for age, he or she has no idea what the work disability is, and therefore is going to be put in the corner when they're asked, how can you know that the disability is greater than what the AMA guides would otherwise provide. By the way, you'll note up here it says impairment rating, upper extremity, lower extremity, finger, etc., converts to whole person impairment. This is something we always have to remember. We only adjust for FEC, occupation, and age, whole person impairment numbers. We do not adjust finger numbers, thumb numbers, upper extremity numbers, lower extremity numbers, toe numbers, etc., etc. Because if you do, you will always, always, always end up paying too much money. If, for example, you cut off a person's leg, that would be 90% lower extremity. If you rated that out, you would fast approaching, if not pay, a firm total case. But actually, a 90% leg adjusted to whole person impairment is about 36% permanent disability after being adjusted out. So actually it is 36% whole person impairment. So be careful, only rate out whole person impairment, not any other kind of number. Back to the pain. Adjustments for lack of treatment. This is a pain, and I want to preface this and then we'll get back to it. If this is what the AMA guides say. If a patient declines surgical, pharmacological, or therapeutic treatment of an impairment, and that decision neither decreases nor increases the estimated percentage of impairment. That is actually true under the AMA guide. It is wrong under the case law. I wanted you to make a note of that, and I will explain that more fully in a couple of seconds. Let's go back to pain, though. This is what the AMA guides say on this score. If the individual appears to have pain-related impairment that has increased the burden of his or her burden the burden of his or her condition slightly, let's emphasize the word slightly, the examiner may increase the percentage by up to 3% whole person impairment. This is not automatic, even though a lot of doctors treat it as such. And it is 3% per injury. And also, 3 plus 0 equals 0, 2 plus 0 equals 0, 1 plus 0 is equal 0. What does that mean? That means the doctor's only allowed to provide or add on the 1, 2, or 3% whole person impairment for pain if and when they find impairment greater than 0 using the AMA guides. In short, unless there are any objective, verifiable, rateable impairments found in the AMA guide, the doctor can't add on pain whole person impairment pain. So if the zero, if the doctor says, okay, I'm going to use the AMA Guides, Chapter 15 for the spine, and I find DRE Category 1 applicable, which means it's 0% whole person impairment, the doctor can't say, but I feel sorry for you, I'm going to give you 3% for pain. That will not work. They get 0 for pain as well. Continuing on, though, Chapter 18 is the pain chapter, and a Chapter 18 analysis is required, which is something that we almost never see in the rating department. This is an important consideration, an important point, and I want to read it a couple times. Impairment ratings in the guide have already accounted for pain. Impairment ratings in the guides have already accounted for pain. What does that mean? Well, what's the real definition of impairment? The definition of impairment is the estimate of the impact on activities of daily living. Communication, movement, travel, standing, sitting, various activities. Now, for example, lifting, that would be a part of an activity of daily living. If because of your injury you no longer lift, you can no longer lift, or you can no longer lift as well as you used to, what invariably is the factor that's keeping you from doing so? I would suggest it's probably pain, P-I-A-N. So the ADLs, translated to whole person impairment, is expressing some element of pain. So when you get your 8%, 10%, 12% whole person impairment from whatever chapter you use, that percentage incorporates an estimate of impact on the activities of daily living caused by pain. So for the doctor to just say, well, it's 10% whole person impairment using the spine chapter, and I'm going to give them 3% for pain, fails to account for the fact that the doctor is in all likelihood double counting or double dipping for the applicant. If the examining doctor determines the individual has pain-related impairment, they must decide whether that impairment has already been incorporated into the rating. In other words, just like we said a couple seconds ago, if the examining physician determines the individual has pain-related impairment, they must decide whether that pain impairment has already been incorporated from the impairment taken from one of the other chapters, Chapter 15 for the spine, Chapter 16 for the upper extremities, Chapter 17 for the lower extremities. What is the pain chapter not used for? It is expressly prohibited. Number one, conditions adequately rated using the other chapters. Okay, that's just a restatement of the same thing I've said several times over. Low credibility. You know, we often see that with the Weibel sign and that and other testing, or sometimes the doctor will indicate that he didn't believe the applicant was giving full strength, and nevertheless, doctors often provide impairment for pain. That is inappropriate under the AMA guides. An unwillingness or inability to provide information, specifically detail regarding the pain and whether it makes good physiological sense. 3, ambiguous or controversial pain syndromes are not analyzed using the pain chapter and cannot receive 1, 2, or 3% for pain. What are those? Myofascial pain. I'm sure if you had a dime for every report you'd see with myofascial pain, you could probably retire. Fibromyalgia, which, by the way, footnote, that's not a topic for today. I found that every fibromyalgia case I've dealt with includes a psychiatric component. And I believe as a non-physician that if you've got a fibromyalgia case, you're in a strong position to do psychological discovery. You may need to get a doctor to assist you by stating that there is a psychological or psychiatric component, but I've never personally had much of a problem getting the doctor to admit that, and thereby blowing up and allowing much greater discovery than what would otherwise be allowed. All right, what other ambiguous or controversial pain syndromes are not covered by the AMA Guides Chapter 18 and therefore don't receive impairment for pain? Disputed neurogenic difficulties, and thoracic outlet syndrome. There's something we see a great deal as well. All of these are officially cured in California. Thank you, Arnold. By the way, I miss Arnold. That's not a political statement. Loved Arnold, hate Arnold. I just miss him because he's the only person in the universe that I can try to impersonate, and people actually occasionally even know who I'm impersonating. Thank you, Arnold. But my client really hurts. They really have pain, says applicant's counsel. Well, the AMA Guides addresses that. The judgment that pain-related impairment is unrateable does not mean that the doctor considers the pain to be unreal or fabricated. Okay, of course, with the little growing nose, they may believe that it is unreal or fabricated, but that's not the point. The point is we're not calling the injured worker a liar. We're just saying that the pain cannot be substantiated in any objective matter. All we have is subjective complaints that really don't make a lot of sense. So this is kind of fun. How to rate pain. Watch this. You're going to find it more than a little confusing. And certainly do not take it down any notes on this one because, well, you'll see at the end where we're going. If the body system impairment rating is inadequate, that is, for example, we use the spine, Chapter 15. It doesn't cover everything according to the doctor. And the pain increases the burden of the condition, that is the impact on activities of daily living, slightly, underline the word slightly, then the doctor may increase the impairment by up to 3%. However, so if it's the burden is slightly, they have to find if it's rateable, determine the class, and award up to 3%. On the other hand, if the pain increases the burden substantially, not merely slightly, but substantially. And note that's in quotes because that's from the AMA guide. If the pain increases the burden substantially, then the doctor has to perform a formal pain assessment. Then the doctor has to use tables 8-4 and 8-6. Then the doctor has to determine the classification. Then the doctor has to determine whether that's rateable. And then the doctor can award up to 3%. You heard it correctly. 3%, well, there's just a problem here. I'm adding 3%, or substantial, it's just 3%. That's your AMA Guides 5th edition. That's why in the beginning I said you might want to rely on your errata sheet to make sure that there aren't any mistakes that you're dealing with, because it is just full of them. This is just one they didn't correct, and we are just stuck with the 3% whole person impairment for any level of pain, whether the impact on activities of daily living or the extra burden is slight, anywhere between slight and substantial. The schedule is wrong. Your permanent disability schedule is dead wrong. It says that you add the pain whole person impairment to the conventional impairment. That's not right. Under the AMA Guides, you are actually supposed to combine. Why is that important? 67 plus 3 is a boatload of money. 67 combined with 3 is 68. So why do I think this is important? Well, you might say, well, the permanent disability schedule trumps what the AMA Guides say. That's not true. The permanent disability rating schedule is considered a regulation, as is the AMA Guides to the evaluation of permanent impairment. So we have two regulations that seem to counteract one another. So can you make the argument when it's well worth it, such as in a 63 combined with 3 versus 63 added to 3 situation, and we do see situations like this. Can we make the argument that the schedule is wrong and that we should be following the AMA Guides rules? Absolutely, and we have case law where exactly the reverse has happened. There was the KITE, K-I-T-E decision a while back in which there was a bilateral hip problem, and the combination of the two numbers, the left hip and the right hip, would have resulted in a number that the doctor didn't think was high enough. And so the doctor, making reference to the two hips working together in a synergistic way, suggested that there was actually greater impairment as a result of the two hips combined, the disability of the 2 hips combined together, as opposed to each individually added up. So the board said, okay, fine, we'll allow that synergistic effect argument, and we'll allow you to add these 2 hip disabilities rather than combine them. So in short, the board has indicated to us that they will consider alternative methodologies for bringing numbers together. They'll, in combinations of value situations, they'll permit adding if the argument is made appropriately. By the same token then, if adding is required for the schedule, for example, there are strong arguments that it should be combined instead. Again, this is supported by the errata sheet. It's supported by page 584 of the AMA guides, 589 of the AMA guides, etc. So an argument to definitely keep in our back pocket. You're not going to run across this one very often, but when you do, it's going to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So getting a headache? I know I am whenever I review this stuff. I've got a suggestion here, just a little medical advice, although I do not have a medical degree and I do not play the role of a doctor on television. But here's a claim form. Take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. No, actually, don't call me in the morning because we have more to go over. This is something I was referring to earlier. No compensation is payable in a case of death, blah, 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 by the unreasonable refusal to submit to medical treatment if the risk of treatment is, in the opinion of the WCAB, inconsiderable in view of the seriousness of the injury. What does this say? This says if you have an injury and you don't want the treatment and the employer has offered the treatment and the treatment would dramatically decrease your permanent disability, you may receive a lower number. Now compare that to page 20, labor code to page 20 of the AMA guides, which we already looked at. If the patient declines surgical, pharmacological, or therapeutic treatment of an impairment, that decision neither decreases nor increases the estimated percentage of impairment. So, as I suggested earlier, the AMA guides is a regulation. It is not considered the labor code. This, on the other hand, which says just the opposite, labor code 4056, is the labor code, and it trumps a regulation such as verbiage found in the AMA guides. Why is this important? We'll take a look at this. We have a case that recently came down from the city of Stockton, Hanker. This individual had a problem with the heart, was suffering from extreme fatigue, difficulty functioning at all. There were 2 different treatments options, and for those of you who are faint of heart, you might not want to look for the next few seconds. I'll tell you when you can look again. There was a medication which would not provide much relief, or an ablation procedure. Don't look, don't look. I'll let you know when you can look. It's pretty nasty. The doctor said if you just go on the medication alone, you'll suffer 80% whole person impairment. However, the ablation would take it down to 0. That's a fairly extreme situation, but nonetheless, that was the doctor's word, and that's the evidence that the WCAB took in. Okay, those of you who didn't want to look, you can look again. The applicant refused the ablation and insisted that he was going to go with the medicine only. And the holding was, okay, you want to go with the medication, you don't want to go with the surgical procedure that will dramatically decrease, if not totally eliminate your permanent disability, fine, then you get a 0. Here's the reasoning. The judge had found that the applicant, or that the employer had met their burden. They'd made an unequivocal tender of treatment that, per the available medical evidence, would reduce the permanent disability to 0. And the applicant refused the treatment without good cause. Now, without good cause, I'm not sure that this was without good cause. I think that perhaps applicant or his or her representative probably didn't do such a great job in this particular situation. Because if you do a little medical research on these ablations, they can go downhill. Per the Mayo Clinic, it can cause a heart puncture, damage to the heart valves, blood clots, heart attack, and stroke. So it would be difficult for me to say that it would be unreasonable for an injured worker to agree to undergo this ablation procedure, even if it was going to decrease the impairment in PD from 0, or the whole person impairment from that's from 80 to 0. But I think this was a poorly prosecuted case, and the only evidence to the judge and the WCAB pointed in the direction of a defense victory. Range of motion for the spine. You do not want to, real simple, you don't want to use range of motion. You want to use the diagnosis-related estimate methodology. First off, the DRE is a lot simpler. And that's a lot easier to figure out whether the doctor is playing with the numbers or is inappropriately, or rather mistakenly applying the range of motion testing itself. But if the doctor is going to try to use the range of motion, he's going to have to come up with an explanation, and we're going to, or a justification, and there are only certain justifications that are allowable. Before we get to that, what is not valued in terms of the AMA guides for the spine? Spondylosis, spondylolisthesis, herniated discs without radiculopathy. You might wonder, wait a minute, if I give somebody, if somebody suffers a herniated disc, they're no longer whole. They've got a hole in their body, and it's not going to fix itself. Don't they? Why wouldn't they get impairment or permanent disability for that? And the explanation is very simple. If you have a herniated disc, but the herniation is not impinging on a nerve root, you don't have radiculopathy down the leg or up the arm. If you don't have radiculopathy, you have no subjective complaints. In fact, you have no impact on the extremity. If there's no impact on the extremity, there can be no impact on your activities of daily living. If there can be no impact on your activities of daily living, there can be no whole person impairment. So that's how that works. Similarly, aging changes, DDD, degenerative disc disease, no impairment is provided for that, and particularly with the DRE methodology, and that's in large part because it's not disabling. So, as I said, we want to use the DRE methodology, not the range of motion methodology. And the AMA guide supports that. Indeed, the AMA guide, Chapter 15, the spine chapter, says that the DRE method is the, quote, primary method, end of quotes. The range of motion is only secondary. You need to have an exception to the DRE to use it, and to underscore how important it is to push for the DRE, if we can get to the DRE, you need to know this fact. If you take the same injury with the same person and you do the DRE methodology with it and the range of motion methodology with them, the range of motion on average is going to come up with an impairment number 2.5 times that which the DRE will. So you're going to spend almost 3 times too much money if you allow the doctor to use the range of motion when it should have been the DRE methodology. So say no to the range of motion methodology or pay too much money. As I suggested earlier, the DRE is primary and the doctor has to identify an exception to the DRE. The doctor can't just provide it. It's not sufficient for the doctor to say range of motion provides greater PD. There's a couple problems with that sentence. Number one, the doctor has no idea because the doctor is not adjusting for FEC occupation and age. The doctor has no idea what the PD is. But number two, to say range of motion provides greater PD is to state the obvious. Range of motion virtually always provides greater impairment than does the DRE methodology. If this quote-unquote exception were permissible, it would be an exception that swallowed the rule, and we would virtually never use the DRE methodology. Range of motion is fairer. I have no idea what fairer means, and the doctor is going to have to explain that and justify that. Range of motion more accurately reflects the PD. Does this violate Guzman? Yes, actually it would violate Guzman because the doctor is supposed to, if you apply Guzman, find the more accurate methodology providing impairment, not PD. And we've seen doctors falter on that by, again, confusing impairment with PD, as we discussed in great detail earlier. Additionally, silence. Sometimes we just have the doctors apply the range of motion without explaining why they've not chosen to use the DRE, and that won't do the trick either. When can the doctor legitimately use the range of motion? Well, first, if the cause of the injury is not clear. I've actually had doctors make this argument. Well, I can't tell the cause of the injury. I really can't tell the cause of the impairment, so I'm going to use range of motion. Well, fine. What does that mean? It means we win the AOE-COE issue. If the doctor can't determine whether it was work-related, we're happy to stipulate to the range of motion methodology. We're still going to play 0. Number 2, it's statutorily mandated that the range of motion be used. Well, we live in California, so you needn't worry about this because there are other states in the union, use the AMA Guides 5th edition, that mandate the use of range of motion in all situations, but we don't live there, so don't sweat it. What situations is range of motion permitted? Multi-level involvement in the same spinal region. Multi-level involvement in the same spinal region. By spinal region, I mean cervical, thoracic, and lumbar. What's the multi-level involvement? It's not multi-level DDD, degenerative disc disease. It's not multi-level bulges because those can be entirely asymptomatic. It's not multi-level herniations without radiculopathy for exactly the reason I stated earlier. Without radiculopathy, there is no impact on activities of daily living. No, the multi-level involvement, multi-level bulges, degenerative changes, or herniations without radiculopathy result in no range of motion methodology being used. You need multi-level or bilateral radiculopathy, and this is according to the DEU at the annual bar meeting, 80th annual bar meeting. By the way, just a quick word about radiculopathy. If the applicant complains of radiculopathy, that is pain down the leg or up the arm, that won't do the trick. And if there's an MRI showing what appears to be an impingement of a nerve root by a herniation, that alone won't do the trick to demonstrate radiculopathy. We need a couple of things. We need, one, an imaging study that does appear to show an impact on a nerve root, and 2, we need the applicant's subjective complaint describing the pain, numbness, and tingling that follows the dermatonal pattern of the nerve root or nerves involved. So in other words, if the doctor says, well, I think I've got an MRI that shows an impact on S1, nerve root S1, and the applicant's complaining about pain, numbness, and tingling around their entire leg, foot, toes, and leg, that makes no medical sense. That makes no organic sense. That's just not the way that nerve root works, nor actually any of the nerve roots, because none of them impact the entire lower extremity. So in that case, we wouldn't have what would qualify as radiculopathy. Ergo, we would not be able, the doctor would not be able to justify utilizing the range of motion methodology. What else can we use the range of motion for? Multi-level involvement in the same spinal region is multi-level fractures, multi-level herniations with radiculopathy, and sometimes people get confused as to what that means. So L4, herniation L4, L5, that is one herniation. That's one level. You need a herniation at L5, L3, L4, and L4, L5. That would qualify as 2 herniations. So we have multiple level herniations with radiculopathy in each of the herniations in the same region of the spine. That would qualify for range of motion. Also, multi-level stenosis with multi-level radiculopathy. Here's one of my favorite phrases to say, alteration of motion segment integrity. It took me years to be able to say it quickly. Alteration of motion segment integrity at multiple levels of the region of the spine. What does that mean? Fusions. So if you have 2 or more fusions in a region of the spine, cervical, thoracic, or lumbar, this will qualify for range of motion. And these can be surgically caused or implanted fusions, It can also be congenital, well, not congenital because that's not going to impact us, but naturally occurring fusions where the spine and body itself attempts to heal the spine. Recurrent radiculopathy is one of the other methods or arguments the doctor can use to justify using range of motion. Now, what does that mean? Well, first off, as I suggested earlier, it's not just the complaint of pain, numbness, and tingling. We need an imaging study, and it's a significant impact on a nerve root that follows the dermatonal pattern or distribution with clinical confirmation. You might say, well, wait a minute. If a herniated disc with radiculopathy gets a DRE methodology, why shouldn't I get a DRE methodology when another herniation in the same disc occurs with radiculopathy? And the only way I can explain that is possibly this way. If you've got if you blow a tire and you fix it, is it really as good as it was originally? Probably not. And if you blow it a second time, you're probably replacing it, not patching it a second time. All right. Multiple episodes of alteration motion segment integrity include increased translational motion, increased angular motion, and decreased motion from developmental fusions, fractures, infections, and arthrodesis. You might say, I don't know what increased translation motion means. I don't know what increased angular motion is. Don't worry about it. If you see a doctor trying to use this, please give me a call. In over 10,000 reports that we've analyzed, the number of doctors have tried to use it, a very small number have actually succeeded. Number one, it's very difficult to do. It's difficult to understand. And the AMA Guide's portion that describes how to do it is actually wrong. So again, if you run across this, I virtually guarantee the doctor did it wrong, and I'd be happy to walk you through it. All right, some easier stuff. Talk about grip and pinching mistakes that we see a whole lot of. The upper extremity strength evaluation in Chapter 16 describes grip and pinch strength for the hand and manual muscle testing for the shoulder and upper arm. Here are some of the red flags. The AMA Guides approaches the situation far differently from what we used to do with the 97 schedule and earlier. These are quotes from the AMA Guides. Because strength measurements are influenced by subjective factors, the Guides does not assign a large role to such measurements. Many subjective factors, including fatigue, handedness, time of day, age, nutritional state, pain, cooperation, influence strength measurements. These are all factors the doctor should try to use grip strength on you. These are all things that you need to address with the doctor. The correlation of strength with the performance of activity as a daily living is poor. So if the doctor says to you, oh my goodness, they've lost, according to this test, they've lost a whole lot of strength in the arm or in the hand, you may say, well, so what? Because that doesn't necessarily mean there's a significant impact on activities of daily living. If there's no significant impact on activities of daily living, there's no significant impairment. Increased strength does not necessarily equate with increased function. So, nevertheless, the doctors do like to use the grip strength methodology because, well, that's the way they always did it. So let's talk about these gripless ideas. If the doctor does it incorrectly and uses the grip strength methodology, it can be worth serious money. Up to 30% upper extremity, 18% whole person impairment, adjusted for FEC occupation and age. We're talking 31% permanent disability, just shy of $50,000. The truth of the matter is, it should be worth, if not zero, quickly approaching zero. When can grip and pinch be used? And again, the doctors love to use the grip. They've got those those testing tools. It can only be used in a rare case. Rare, that's the word that the AMA got found in the AMA Guide. It can only be used if there is no painful condition. Why is that? Well, if the applicant doesn't give full strength grip in the gripping test, it may not be due to a loss of strength, which is what they're trying to measure. It may be because it hurts when they do that. Unless you're a masochist, you probably don't give full effort when whatever it is you're doing causes pain. And the doctor's trying to say that they're measuring strength. Instead, if there's a painful condition, they're measuring response to pain. We also don't use grip or pinch in the presence of decreased motions. If there is no flexion or extension of your thumb, for example, there's no doubt that you're going to lose strength, grip strength. However, we're going to use a more objective, more specific methodology in that situation. We would rate out and pay for decreased flexion and extension of the thumb. When else? Not in the presence of deformities. Not if there's an absence of parts. If they lose the thumb, we'll pay for the amputation. If they lose the middle finger, we'll pay for the amputation. We're not going to pay for the loss of grip strength. Similarly, not for elbow or shoulder injuries. Those of you who've been doing workers' compensation way too long, and I suspect I'm not the only one, you recall doctors actually saying, well, they've got a shoulder injury, so we're going to do a grip strength analysis. That never made sense to me. I mean, shoulder's an awful long way away from the hand, but nevertheless, they used to do that no more, according to the AMA guides. Also, we're not allowed to do it within 1 year of the injury or surgery because guess what? Quick flash, newsflash, people get better. I know it sometimes doesn't happen in workers' comp, but in the real world, if they have an injury, they get better. If they have a surgery, they tend to get better. That's the objective. And therefore, the AMA guide says, hey, doctor, allow that surgery to get better. Not if there's greater than a 20% variation in the grip strength test. Not if there's evidence of less than maximal effort. For example, the doctor will observe whether there's blanching of the knuckles if they're giving full effort. Not to rate carpal tunnel. Not to rate carpal tunnel. One more time. Not to rate carpal tunnel. That grip and pinch strength were always the way that the doctors used to rate carpal tunnel. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And so what do we know? We know that there's about 1 million different times and reasons they're not supposed to use the grip and pinch. Almost invariably, they violate these. Watch out for all of them. Keep this list on this last several pages and check off the problems with each report where you see the grip and pinch strength methodology being used. Okay, complex regional pain syndrome. We're going to talk about this for about 45 seconds. This is very expensive. RSD for causalgia, CRPS 1 and CRPS 2. Here's what you really need to know. Plan on a life pension. If they're diagnosed with RSD or causalgia, CRPS 1 or 2 in an extremity, and they successfully prove it, you're probably going to pay for something fast approaching the entire cost of the limb. Definitely, just like what I was talking about earlier, CRPS seems to go hand in hand with psychiatric psychological problems. Honestly, I've never had a CRPS 1 or 2 case in which there was not a psychological or psychiatric overlay. So you definitely want to evaluate or investigate and conduct discovery on the psychological component. Also, the really most important part is the diagnosis. And there is a table in the AMA guides in Chapter 16 that lists a number of objective findings. It's Table 16-16 that must be observed concurrently for a diagnosis of CRPS. What did I just say here? I said that the doctor may say it's CRPS, but unless the doctor can identify 8 of the various findings concurrently for the diagnosis of CRPS, it's not CRPS, and they're not going to get a rating for CRPS. All right, quickly to carpal tunnel. What is it? It's an entrapment or compression neuropathy. In other words, well, let's give the medical explanation. A nerve compression type lesion that implies disproportion between the volume of the peripheral nerve and the space through which it passes. In other words, it doesn't fit so good. Here we've got the carpal tunnel. It's actually a tunnel. We've got some bones down here and a ligament up here and the median nerve going through here. So if the tunnel gets smaller, that is the bones and or the transverse carpal ligament get stuck closer together, it's going to impinge on that median nerve, and that's why we talk about a carpal tunnel release. That's the transverse carpal ligament that is released to give the median nerve some room. And this, by the way, is the pattern of pain, numbness, and tingling that we would expect with a true carpal tunnel case. if you've got a doctor diagnosing carpal tunnel, make sure they describe in detail where the subjective complaints are, because it's the entire hand that's not carpal tunnel. That's a subjective complaint that does not make good medical sense. So what causes this condition? Pressure on the median nerve. Where does the pressure on the median nerve come from? Just about anywhere, anything that reduces the space in the carpal tunnel. Most of the things that cause carpal tunnel, if it is indeed carpal tunnel, are not industrial. Anything. Let's see here. Conditions that may play a role. Repetitive, forceful grasping with the hand. Is that industrial? Probably. Maybe not, but probably. Repetitive bending of the wrists. Well, that may be industrial. It might not. Vibrating tools. Well, if you're dealing with a jackhammer, that would definitely be a potential cause. Other vibrating tools, such as a dental hygienist equipment, probably not. Let's talk about a few more where they're where you can expect it not to be industrial. Hormonal changes. Highly unlikely that this is going to be an industrial factor, but certainly something that you're going to need to investigate in deposition and discovery. What about arthritis? Highly unlikely it is industrial, and yet 46 million Americans currently live with arthritis. It's the #1 leading cause of disability, and is becoming more and more so given that all us baby boomers are getting older and getting more arthritic. I'm certainly one of those, and if I have carpal tunnel, you'll probably be able to blame it on my arthritis. Not my job. Who says this? The Centers for Disease Control. There's an organization we probably should be able to believe. Diabetes, another non-industrial factor, unless, of course, you're a taste tester for C's candies. Thyroid imbalance, highly unlikely it's industrial. Broken or dislocated bones in the wrist that cause swelling, well, it's going to be very easy to tell whether that's industrial or not industrial. And by the way, as we go through these factors, remember, if we show enough of them, we may be able to demonstrate that the injury is not industrial. But even if we lose on that, we may utilize this list of factors to determine that we should be receiving some, if not a lot, of apportionment. Tunnel size. The size of the carpal tunnel itself can impact whether a person has carpal tunnel. The size of your wrist is irrelevant, but if you have a smaller carpal tunnel, it makes you more prone to carpal tunnel syndrome. And so you were born that way. That's not going to be industrial. Heredity, well, that's probably not going to be industrial either. Genes account for about half the cases of carpal tunnel, and some studies show that there is a much higher risk in women who have an identical twin with the disorder than those with a non-identical twin. So it's heredity. It's the way you were born, and that comes from Harvard. Metabolic diseases, again, not industrial. Diabetes, thyroid disease, etc. Autoimmune diseases, not industrial. Examples, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and connective tissue disorders. Highly unlikely to make any argument that these are industrial. And pregnancy. Now, it's possible for this to be industrial, but if it is, I think we have much bigger problems than AOE, COE, don't you? 20 to 60%, I know it's a wide range, of pregnant women develop carpal tunnel, and within a year or thereabouts after the birth, the carpal tunnel disappears. Because they have the swelling from the pregnancy, it impinges on the median nerve, but that goes away. How many times have you seen a situation where the pregnant woman has been diagnosed with carpal tunnel, she's on TD for a while, she has the baby, and they perform a carpal tunnel release shortly after the birth of the baby? This makes absolutely no sense. They should definitely wait a year for it to resolve on its own. Hormonal changes other than pregnancy are also impact carpal tunnel and are unlikely to be industrial, such as ovary removal. Body weight, once again, not likely to be industrial, but being heavy like myself can double your risk of carpal tunnel syndrome. And we're getting fatter as an American population. Between 7680 and 2003 to 4, obesity went from 15% to nearly a third of the country, according to the CDC. Now, here's some quotes I absolutely love, and we're just about done, so do not worry, we're going to make it on time, I do believe. Quote, contrary to properly held belief, there's no strong scientific evidence that links computer use to carpal tunnel syndrome. Who says that? What kind of bomb-throwing radical defense bar slash insurance industry folks? Nope, none of those. Who are the mean, terrible, employee-hating outfits that make these preposterous claims? The Mayo Clinic, Harvard Press, some of the most highly regarded organizations, medical organizations in the world agree that, let's read it again, contrary to properly held belief, no strong scientific evidence links computer use to carpal tunnel syndrome. This is interesting information to provide to a doctor in deposition to cross-examine them. Hey doctor, are you really smarter than the Mayo Clinic and Harvard Medical School? Also, up to 2/3 of people with presumed occupational, quote-unquote, CTS were found to have other medical conditions capable of causing CTS. I think that's been made clear given the list of non-industrial factors that we've just gone over. One other thing, there was a study of 5,600 workers recently that found computer use provided or caused no risk of carpal tunnel. That came from JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, the same people who provided you the AMA guides to the evaluation of permanent impairment. One more thought. Another study found that, quote-unquote, heavy computer use nearly the entire day did not cause people to face increased risk of carpal tunnel. That's Neurology, the official journal of the American Academy of Neurology. The cure? Well, interestingly, carpal tunnel is going down. There's a decrease nationally significantly by about 21%. Actually, depending on who you look at, 21 to 50%. Well, wait a minute. We are all now typing. We're all typing on our phones. We're typing on our pads. We're typing on our laptops. We're typing on, we're not on typewriters anymore. But this observation was made by, in a recent article found in the Harvard University Press. Clearly, if keyboarding activities were a significant risk of carpal tunnel, we should have seen over the last 10 to 15 years an explosion of cases. If keyboarding is a risk, it can't be a strong factor. So, typing may be dangerous, but only if you have writer's block. Nothing to your wrist should just be fine. All right, that's everything for the day. We've gone over for about 60 seconds. I apologize for that. You all have a wonderful afternoon. I suspect some questions have been emailed. I will respond to those. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go over them today. And hang on one second. I'll put you on with Tammy one more time. And for me, have a wonderful day.